as we prepare to engage in this conversation on emotional health. We're going to give you opportunity to come in. I know the first live that I tried to go live with had a little issue with, but we are live and we are ready to begin this conversation on emotional health. So come on in, and once you get in, let me know that you are here in the comment section. I want to welcome all of you who are on you're on Facebook, whether it's the church's page or whether you're on my personal page or if you're on YouTube. We certainly want to welcome you into today's conversation as we begin to discuss this very important subject matter of mental health. So I'm going to take a moment to make sure that I share this, but you all come on in. Let somebody know that we are indeed live, and we are ready to have this conversation. Amen. And we are going to be connected to my conversation from last week. But I'm also going to have in my backdrop for the next 6 to 8 weeks or so during Sunday school, I'm going to be looking at Peter Scazzaro's book, Emotionally Healthy Christianity. And so I'm going to be taking a lot of the content from that book as well as applying some biblical passages to the conversation. So come on in the room. Let's get started. Good morning, Bernadette. So good to see you. Miss Pam, good morning to you. Good to have you on today. Thank you for being on. Want to welcome you, everybody. Certainly want to welcome you. Come on in the room. Let's get started with today's conversation. And we're talking about emotional health. All right. So, Vet, I see you. Good morning to you. So, let's get started. I want to remind you of a passage that I dealt with on last week. And we'll use this as kind of like the biblical backdrop for today's conversation. Camille, good to see you. Good morning to you. Let's go here to the book of Nehemiah. I was here on last week. Let's focus in on verse 4. It says, "When I heard these words, I sat down and wept. I mourned for a number of days, fasting and praying before the God of the universe." All right. So let me jump up to those early verses just to make sure that you know what's going on. You know that Nehemiah got the bad report of what was going on in his homeland. He heard that the walls were down. And due to that report, it caused him to be impacted emotionally. And I want to really focus in on that overall processing. How do I receive bad news? How do I process bad news? Emotionally, what do I do with it? And you all know that 2020 has been a consistent reporting of bad news. I could start at the beginning of the year and just all the different things that have gone by slowly but surely. Many people were impacted, for instance, by the death of Kobe Bryant and his daughter and those who were on that helicopter. It was such a traumatic death for many people. Even though they didn't know him personally, they were impacted because they just saw him vibrant and they saw him alive, and now he's not alive anymore. So a lot of people that impacted them. A lot of people emotionally impacted by what's going on with a global pandemic, coronavirus. How many people are impacted by the fact that they've lost someone and they could not get to them because of quarantine restrictions, not being able to get into hospitals, especially early on as the pandemic was unfolding. Then you have this civil unrest in real time. Many of us watched the man murdered on TV. That was very traumatic. That was something that emotionally was hard to navigate, emotionally hard to deal with. And not just the death of George Floyd, You had so many other names, Brianna. Just so many of the names of black bodies that reminded us of experiences that we've heard about, that we've read about, that we've experienced on our own, especially those blacks who've had their own experiences with race here in America. And so when we talk about emotional health, I'm talking about all inclusive, how all of these things begin to accumulate. And one of the things that I like about Nehemiah is that as he got bad news, we get to see him process it in real time. Can I just go back to that verse 4? And verse 4 says, "When I heard these words, I sat down and wept." When I heard these words, when I heard what was going on, I sat down and wept. I mourned for a number of days. Now, I want you to do me a favor, and I just want you to sit and I just want you to process for just one moment. I want you to think about what would be going on in Nehemiah's mind. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about the times in which you've gotten bad news and how it has impacted you. And part of my question is, did you take the time to reflect? Did you take the time to sit down? Did you take the time to really think about what you were feeling and what you were going through as you dealt with the bad news? I don't want you to read that sentence too fast. I want you to try to connect with Nehemiah emotionally. Because over the next 6 weeks, this is how I want to push you. I want to push you in this vein of emotional health. How do we get healthy emotionally in the midst of all we are trying to process? So I want you to take a moment. Think about it. Visualize him sitting down. Visualize him contemplating. Visualize his tears. Visualize the back and forth of his mind. Visualize the racing. I want you to get in the comment section. And as you visualize what Nehemiah was feeling, give to me some emotions that you think would be going through his mind, or describe what he's feeling. Anybody. I've got some words in mind, but I want to see your comments first. Get in the comment section, and I want you to write down some of what he's feeling. I want to talk through some of these emotions today. I think it's very important that we take some time as brothers and sisters just to process. So Nehemiah hears bad news. He sits down, he weeps. I need you to get in the comment section. Describe to me some of these emotions. Let's do it. Elder Patrick Lyons says sadness. Sadness. He would experience sadness, and probably a deep sadness. Maybe you know what it's like to be sad and then to feel increasingly that the intensity of that sadness gets heavier and heavier and heavier. Dana says anguish, to feel anguish and sadness. So good. Patrick gives us another one, anxiety, another good word. Being anxious, the worrying. Bernadette says disappointment, another good one. Steve, this is a major one. Helplessness. A lot of people are wrestling with this right now. I'm helpless. I want to do something. I don't know what to do. So many people have asked me, Pastor Cook, what can I do? I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. Nana says discouraged. That's another good one. Yes. Discouragement. And then Vet says confused. Just really not knowing left to right and really feeling disoriented. Another good one. So you all are really on this. All of these emotions you feel whenever something impacts you. These are all good ones. And so, believers, I want us to begin to think about all the things that we feel whenever we're going through something. And we don't just have emotions related to bad stuff. We do have emotions related to good stuff, and even stuff that find their a place on the in between areas of life. But as believers, we've got to navigate this thing called emotional health. So let's go ahead and let's get in this thing, because as we talk about emotional health, I want to give you just ways that Peter Scazzaro, who wrote the book Emotionally Healthy Christianity, he lets us know that in order for us to be emotionally healthy, it's going to require these things. I'm gonna go through these. I won't give commentary on all, but I will give commentary on some. He says, naming, recognizing, and managing our own feelings. One of the reasons why I wanted you to name what Nehemiah is feeling is because part of us being emotionally healthy is connected to us realizing what we're feeling. Because if we can realize what we're feeling, we can process it effectively. But sometimes we are so disoriented that we don't take the time to feel it, and we don't take the time to recognize it, and we engage in avoiding it. Then he says another thing, when we talk about being emotionally healthy, it means identifying with and having compassion for others. Compassion for the person who's emotionally healthy does that, engages in that. Another thing he shares is initiating and maintaining close and meaningful relationships. Emotionally unhealthy people are always having trouble engaging in relationships, meaningful relationships. They always have a way of kind of sabotaging those relationships for whatever the reason. Breaking free from self-destructive patterns. That's what the emotionally healthy person does. They also being aware of how our past impacts our present. So that we understand that there's not a detachment from yesterday and today, that there is a continuum, that there is a connection between the two. It doesn't mean I live in my past, but it does mean I learned the lessons of my past. Then developing the capacity to express our thoughts and feelings clearly. Another reason why I wanted you to engage in that exercise, us naming what Nehemiah felt. Because part of us being able to heal and to be healthy is to be able to diagnose, to be able to say, this is what I'm feeling. That's why before the doctor gives you medicine, he's got to diagnose what you have. He got to talk to you about your symptoms. He needs you to describe your symptoms. And once get a handle of the symptoms, he can figure out, or she can figure out, what the course of action is going to be. So emotionally healthy people do all of those things, but then there's more. Emotionally healthy people also have this respect. He says there is respecting and loving others without having to change them. Emotionally healthy people don't have to engage in manipulation and control of other people. Because many times those people who are trying to control others are experiencing a sense in which they are out of control themselves. Andrea, good morning. I see you. Good to have you on. Emotionally healthy people, let's dig deeper. Asking for what we need, want, or prefer clearly, directly, and respectfully. You know, there's people who, because they lack confidence and there is something lacking emotionally, always walk around the bush, or, go the long way to get to what they need. They don't ask you to borrow money. They just call you talking about all the problems they got, wanting you to tell them what they need, or wanting you to be able to clearly articulate what they're asking. But emotionally healthy people ask for what they need, want, or prefer clearly, directly, respectfully. Accurately self-assessing our strengths, limits, and weaknesses, and freely sharing them with others. It's another sign of an emotionally healthy person. Let's go deeper. Emotional health is concerned also with learning the capacity to resolve conflict maturely and negotiate solutions that consider the perspectives of others. Let me give you last two. Integrating our spirituality with our sexuality in a healthy way, and grieving well. So there's a lot on that list. But when we talk about emotional health, it's a combination of those things that I mentioned. Peter gives us that list. I wanted to share that list with you because I wanted you to see all the areas that are necessary for us if we want to be healthy emotionally. Let's just real quickly, let's just go back to Nehemiah. Because what I always teach you about scripture is be careful about thinking that the events of scripture happen as fast as you read them. There is time that takes place. So notice in verse 1, it says, during the month of Chislev in the 12th year. Let's just go to chapter 2. It says, during the month of Nisan. So you see a division of time between chapter 1 and chapter 2 in the book of Nehemiah. And I share that with you because I want you to understand that as Nehemiah was processing what he was feeling, there was time that took place. So that when it says that he sat down and wept, he says, I mourned for a number of days. So I didn't rush the process. I didn't act like, boom, I should just be over that. And I want us to understand, Nia Darby joined me on a conversation, and we talked about George Floyd's death, which was indeed murder on live TV. Over 8 minutes, we watched a man being murdered. And we know that for us, we know that there is a point of connection between his death and accounts of history throughout this nation's history. So that the way the black community has been policed, we know that is not an isolated incident. And as we process that, we know that that's not just a one-time occurrence. There is a continuum. That is one event connected to the course of history throughout this country. Now, why do I bring that up? I bring that up because I want you to understand that we are witnessing people process in real time their emotional state. And when people don't know how to move to emotional health, Patrick Lyons did a conversation on this. There's a lot of people who are talking about those who were looting last week. Let me just for a moment kind of talk about that before I dig deep. And much of the coverage, much of the conversation, people who wanted to change the subject from the murder of George Floyd wanted to engage in those conversations. Isn't that a shame that those people would tear up their own communities? You heard a lot of that conversation going on. And there's some truth to that, but there's more to that. Let me just unpack that for a second. First of all, there were people that came from out of town in these towns, and these people organized a lot of the violence that you saw. A lot of people were peacefully protesting, and the peaceful protests were co-opted by those who engaged in the violence. And what they did was they incited violence to people who were already at an emotional high. Now, Patrick Lyons has shared with us before. He has given us the illustration of emotions as a volume meter. And that if you aren't careful, that if your emotions turn up high, and emotionally what you feel is up here, your ability to think and process stays here. So your emotional space overshadows your ability to think soberly and your ability to think clearly. And so when you have people who are already inciting things, people from the outside who come and descend upon these places, and they incite activity, people who are already emotionally high, it's like adding gasoline to an already burning fire. We saw this unfold in real time. And what people want to do, instead of engaging in the nuance of the conversation, because again, they have an agenda. They want to make sure that we don't talk about the fact that this was a murder connected to systemic racism throughout this country. We don't want to talk about that. So let's talk about how we can villainize the protesters, and we can just label this one community. Now, I do need to say this, that when we talk about this whole idea of protest, remember that there were armed men that marched upon state capitol in various cities because they were protesting their unhappiness with the idea of being quarantined. And there was some violence there. Many of these men and women were armed. There was a lot going on, but some way, somehow, the narrative gets shifted once we deal with this particular subject that we're dealing with now. But let me get back to what I'm talking about. Emotional health. Emotional health is so important because, as Patrick Lyon says, if your emotional volume is up here, it is easy for you to be manipulated and controlled by what you feel. That's why emotionally healthy people value the importance of time and value the importance of process. You can't rush things like grieving. You need to appropriately deal with anger. I wanted to talk about fear because some people over spiritualize the conversation and act as if you're a Christian, and because the Bible says God has not given us the spirit of fear, some people act like believers are never afraid. We over spiritualize. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And the reason why I need to do about 6 to 8 weeks on this is because today I need to spend the rest of my time. I got about a half hour or so left with you. I want to give you 10 symptoms of unhealthy people. 10 symptoms of people who engage, and I'm talking about Christians today. 10 symptoms of Christians who are unhealthy emotionally, and the type of activity and the type of practices that they engage in. If you're still with me, get in the comment section and say, I'm still with you. I'm still with you. I need to make sure you all are hearing this and you all are connected to this conversation. I want to give you 10 symptoms of unhealthy Christians. And these come to us from Peter Scazzaro, and they are important for us to unpack in today's conversation. I see you. Patrick says, I'm still with you. Pam says, I'm still with you. I see you. Let's dig deeper. So, I need you to hear this. Christian spirituality without an integration of emotional health can be deadly to yourself, your relationship with God, and the people around you. Now you need to screenshot that. Christian spirituality without an integration of emotional health can be deadly to yourself, your relationship with God, and the people around you. See, we are integrated beings. And there's a lot to us. So there's the spiritual aspect of who we are. There's the emotional aspect of who we are, the mental aspect of who we are, physical, social, all these different areas of who we are. And we are required to make sure that we feed all of them appropriately. Now, of course, I'm talking about emotions, but I need to mention that all of you needs to be healthy. That I want to be holistic. I don't want to just be strong on one side. Me and my boy We were talking the other day, and we were talking about lifting weights. And we were laughing because we were saying you can always tell the difference between the guys that spend all day, doing bicep work and they ain't done no leg work. I seen guys that, man, they like roosters up top. They walking around like this, all big and bad, all tough, and their legs are like toothpicks. They ain't did no leg work. All they did is chest work and maybe some arm work. And we were just laughing about that the other day. But spiritually, some of us are like that. That we work on ourselves physically, maybe we work on ourselves socially, but emotionally we're lacking, or mentally we're lacking. And so the believer, the Christian who is going to be healthy spiritually, has to understand the integration, has to understand the integration of all of these. I see you, Patrick. Yeah, roosters. So Peter goes on to say emotional health and spiritual maturity are inseparable. It is not possible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. Screenshot that. Because some of us think that we can separate the two. But no, you need both. You need to be emotionally healthy and spiritual maturity. There is no separation between the two. And we can't trick the system. We can't trick God. So let's unpack this thing. Let's go deeper. Because I want you to see 10 areas that Christians try to cover up in which they are really unhealthy emotionally, and that we need to unpack this thing and we need to illuminate it. Number one, what do Christians do sometimes? Number one symptom of an unhealthy person emotionally, unhealthy believer emotionally, is that they use God to run from God. They use God to run from God. Here, Peter Scazzaro says, in my case, using God to run from God happens when I create a great deal of God activity in order to avoid difficult areas in my life God wants to change. So it's like I can be busy for God and not deal with my emotional health. I can act like I'm not grieving. I can act like I'm not hurting because I've been making it to choir rehearsal. Because I've been preaching in the pulpit. I've been teaching in class. God activities do not substitute or not a substitute for emotional health. And so what we try to do is we try to use God to run from God. Emotionally unhealthy believers do that, and they do that often. God activities you do for God, do not substitute for things that you've got to do intentionally to be healthy emotionally. Peter gives us this list. I'll just read them to you. I won't have them on screen. He says, I know I'm in trouble when I do God's work to satisfy me and not him. I know I'm in trouble when I do things in God's name he never asked me to do. There are a lot of people who get into ministry because they thought that was what they were supposed to do, only to find out that with this assignment comes a responsibility. And if you go and you weren't called to go, it's heavy. I know I'm in trouble, he says, when I pray about God doing my will, not about me surrendering to his will. He says, I know I'm in trouble when I demonstrate Christian behaviors so significant people think well of me. That is, some people go to church because socially it's just the good thing to do. It's a class thing. Some people are part of the churches that they are part of not because they're being fed there. They're part of it because that's the quote unquote church to be at. And so it's like I'm doing the right thing. The problem is in the motive in which I do it. I know I'm in trouble, Peter says, when I focus on theological points out of concern for my fears and unresolved emotional issues rather than out of concern for God's truth. Says, I know I'm in trouble when I use biblical truth to judge and devalue others. When I know I'm in trouble when I exaggerate my accomplishments for God to subtly compete with others. A lot of passive aggressive people out there. And they always are flashing their resume. Not because they want people to see God, but they want people to know how good they're doing. They like, faking it. I kind of want God to get the glory, but I need people to say my name. Make pronouncements like the Lord told me I should do this when the truth is, I think the Lord told me to do this. So these are all ways in which people use God to run from God. There's a deficit in me. And in order to make up the deficit, I engage in spiritual activities instead of dealing with the thing that's disrupting me. All right? Here's unhealthy symptom number 2. Ignoring the quote unquote ungodly emotions of anger, sadness, and fear. I remember early on during the pandemic, I did a conversation with pastors, and one of the conversations that I did with pastors was on the conversation of fear, and I directly asked pastors, what are you scared of? And the reason why I wanted those pastors to be transparent is because I needed people to understand that their leaders wrestle with fears just like they do. But you know what I got? I got a lot of spiritual people in the comments section. I can't believe preachers are talking about fear. We can't talk about fear. And the issue is we don't deal with it. We act like we don't have it. And it kills us from the inside out. Peter says, when we feel these emotions, we're sure it's an indication that something is wrong with our spiritual life. Anger is dangerous and unloving toward others. Sadness indicates a lack of faith in the promises of God. Depression surely reveals a life outside of the will of God. And fear, the Bible is filled with commands to not be anxious about anything and do not fear. So what do? We inflate ourselves with a false confidence to make those feelings go away. Let me help you out. The Bible does not say that we will never experience these emotions. Going back to Patrick Lyons in his talking about anger and the level, the volume level, one of the things that we have to remember is that the level is there for a reason. The issue isn't not whether those emotions are going to be felt. The issue is whether or not we are going to allow their volume to speak over the volume of godly thinking. The issue is not whether I have those emotions. The issue is how I respond to those emotions. And so what unhealthy believers do, unhealthy, or I should say emotionally unhealthy believers do, is they ignore these emotions of anger, sadness, and fear out of some desire to be more spiritual than what they are, and out of something that is not realistic. Listen to Peter's statement. He says, to feel is to be human. To minimize or deny what we feel is a distortion of what it means to be image bearers of God. To the degree that we are unable to express our emotions, we remain impaired in our ability to love God, others, and ourselves well. So when we reject what we feel, we are minimizing the very humanity that God blessed us with, because to be human is to feel. And just remember when Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Remember the context of that is that he just talked about finding contentment. So the context of the all things is in the conversation of contentment. What does that mean? Paul is saying that I can get through what I'm going through because I'm connected to the right person. I can get through this. I can navigate this, but I still got to process it. I can do all things. And Paul was very clear. I've been on both sides of the spectrum. I've dealt with the extremes. I've been sad and happy, full and hungry. He said, I've dealt with it. I've had a lot. I've had a little. He said, but I've learned the lesson of contentment. And emotionally healthy people understand. They understand that you cannot ignore these emotions because God gave you these. Number three, dying to the wrong things. Dying to the wrong things is very important that we understand. The Bible does call us to die daily so that we surrender ourselves to the deeper things of God. Peter says God intends our deeper, truer self, which he created, to blossom as we follow him. So part of dying to ourselves is about being who God intended us to be. But the problem is that we die to the wrong things. We like to die. We like to sacrifice ourselves on the wrong altar. We are to die to the sinful parts of who we are, Peter says, such as defensiveness, detachment from others, arrogance, stubbornness, hypocrisy, judgmentalism, a lack of being vulnerable. Of course, the obvious stuff like, murder and lying, all of that. We die to those things, but there are some other parts of who we are that we cannot die to. Got to be mindful that we die to the right things, not the wrong things, that we make the sacrifice in the right areas. Because many of us are sacrificing ourselves for the wrong ideas, for the wrong people. We're striving for the wrong goals. We are allowing somebody to vicariously live through us. God called your mom home years ago, yet and still you still hear her words in your head. And you aren't living the life God calls you to live. You're still remembering her criticism and her expectations, even when her expectations don't line up with God's expectations. You got to learn to die to the right things and not the wrong things. Hope I'm coming through. Let me move on. Time is getting away. Another symptom is denying the past impact on the present. Denying the past impact on the present. And we see it in various ways. You ask somebody, especially people that I know people come to me, Pastor Cook, I need to talk. All right, let's talk. This is what I'm going through. I'll say to them, oh, well, isn't this similar to what you've been through before? No, Pastor Cook. This is something else. Pastor Cook, I need to make a decision. I need to decide if this is the person I need to spend the rest of my life with. Okay, what's going on? They say, oh, well, things a little messy over here, but I'm good with that. I just want to ask you about this part. But wait a minute, we can't ignore the messy part, because the messy part is going to come up later. So if you're going to be with them, we got to deal with the messy part. But no. That's just the past, Pastor Cook. I want to deal with this part right here. I engage in those conversations all the time. As a matter of fact, let me be clear. I don't just engage with those conversations with other people. Daryl Cook engages in those conversations himself, because many times we want to detach the past from the present because the past is uncomfortable, even though the past has lessons for us to learn. I tell people all the time, there's no need of you dating the same person with a different name if you're going to get the same results. So you keep saying, I got a type. I got a type. She got to have this figure. He got to have this height. And he got to have this kind of smile. And he got to be this. She got to be that. And I am in no way saying that you can't have expectations and standards for what you expect in a relationship. But what I am saying is, if those ideas have gotten you in trouble in the past for settling on the wrong person, and you are still recovering from those bad decisions, it would seem to me that maybe, just maybe, you ought to learn from the past and not detach it from your present decision making. Maybe, just maybe, you ought not make the same decisions on this job that you did on the last job. Maybe, just maybe, if we're going to have a real conversation around racial reconciliation, that we cannot act like the events that we're seeing unfold on TV are somehow divorced from 400 years of systemic racism and oppression within our criminal justice system, with how cities are zoned, with how life is done. We cannot divorce the past from the present. We've got to understand that whatever decisions I make today, that I need to do it in light of the past. See, my past does not have to become my soul counselor, but my past ought to be something that I consult. And this is the way that I just shorten it out. This is the way that I just make it concise. I learn from, I don't live in my past. That's it right there. That's a tweetable. I think that that's short enough for you to remember. I learn from, I don't live in my past. And it's important that we learn from history, because if we don't learn from history, we make the same mistake. They say, I've actually heard this saying a couple different ways. Some people say a foolish person. Other people say a smart person. I'll just go with smart person, because I don't want to call anybody a fool today. I heard this quote. It says that a smart person learns from their own mistakes. A wise person learns from the mistakes of others. In other words, there is wise counsel in history. And if we want to make a decision, we ought to invite that counselor to the table with other counselors that can help us to make appropriate decisions. And this is for your money. This is for your love life. This is for your parenting. This is for your schooling. This will work in every area of your life. We can't deny the past impact on the present. There are things that happen in history that impact us today. So hope y'all still with me. Here's another symptom. When we divide our lives into secular and sacred compartments. We treat our life like Golden Corral. We treat our faith like Golden Corral. Y'all know I miss Golden Corral. I miss Golden Corral. Matter of fact, you want to know what I really miss? Erie folk, and they still have them across the state. But Erie folk, I miss Ponderosa. I miss Ponderosa. You know, I get me a good meal for about $11 at Ponderosa. And I used to wear that chicken out at Ponderosa. As a matter of fact, I think about Ponderosa. I'm trying to think what else I ate other than the chicken. But man, I love that Ponderosa. See, y'all messing with what is it? Giant Eagle chicken in those of you who live in Erie, everybody getting the Giant Eagle chicken. Well, before that, we was messing with that Ponderosa chicken. I miss Ponderosa. I love me some Ponderosa. But here it is. I can't treat my life like Ponderosa. I can't say, God, I want 2 scoops of love, but hold the faith. God, I want about 3 scoops of your wisdom, but Lord, not in my love life. I ain't trying to be wise in my love life. You can't do life like that. You can't have compartments that you have keys for and say, God, you can go in this door of my life. You can go in this room, but you can't access this room. Your faith has to be integrated in every area of your life. You got to allow God to have access and faith to influence every area of your life. Emotionally unhealthy people compartmentalize their faith, compartmentalize the sacred over here and the secular over there. And then, matter of fact, let me help you out. Maybe I won't just use a sacred and secular. Maybe I'll say righteous and ratchet. Righteous and ratchet. I got a righteous room, God, and I got a ratchet room. God, you got the key to the righteous, but you can't. I can't allow you to see the ratchet. Truth of the matter is, all of us got some righteous and some ratchet in us. All of us got some sacred and some secular. And part of the sanctification process is that God is getting more secular in, more sacred in and taking more secular out. That's part of the process. But I got to allow God to have access so he can get to it all. You wonder why God, you haven't healed me yet. I haven't found healing yet. God is saying, give up the key. You've been trying to block me out of your relationships. You keep saying, oh, that's the type of woman for me. That's the type of man for me. God, you can't have no influence on that. God, I don't want to hear none of that. Don't be unevenly yoked. See, here's the problem. When you do it your way, God's permissive will is, God said, I'm going to let you have that. But you got to live with it now. And many of us are living with it. 2, 3 children later. And you love the babies that you got, but you can't stand who you made them with. And I ain't just talking about the ladies. I'm talking about the brothers. There's some ladies who can testify, and there's some brothers who can testify on that. I get men call me, Pastor Cook, I'm struggling. I'm trying to be the best father I can. I'm providing. I'm doing all that I can. But every time I try to do something, every time something happens, in order for her to control me, she goes right down to the courthouse and she tries to raise the child support. And when I can't pay it, I'm in trouble. Then ladies can testify. I got hooked up with him. He was good when he was hitting me up at 3 a.m. I let him in. We did our thing. Now that child is here. I can't get him to come through. I can't even get some sneakers out of him. Heck, I won't even take the sneakers. I'll take the shirt right about now. Matter of fact, I'm even good on the shirt. Maybe if you could just show up. Can you show up on a birthday? Can you call? And here it is. The point of me talking about this isn't to guilt you in the saying that you got to kill yourself for decisions that have already been made. All I'm saying is that the next child that you have ought to be with somebody who is going to appreciate you, the relationship, and the child that you jointly bring into this world. I'm talking about using yesterday's decisions to make better decisions on today. And then also allowing God to help you to make those decisions. I'm talking about children. I can talk about money. Some of us got that stimulus check. And that stimulus, we got it in the account. That 1,200 came through, and I didn't say 100. I said 100. I said 100. That's that Lower East Side of Erie coming out of me. That 1,200 came through the account on a Friday. It was gone by next Tuesday because we was on Uber Eats. We was on Grubhub. We ordered some Jordans. We ordered some kicks. We ordered all that we could. Matter of fact, some of us had a come up on top of a come up because it wasn't too long ago that we got our taxes, and then we claimed all of our kids, so we got a little extra money for the kids. Not only did we get the extra money for the kids, but we got that stimulus. We got all of that money, and that money was not invested in things that would make money. That money was spent on things that were going to depreciate as soon as the money went out. I need us to understand, because what happens is, from the mindset perspective, God wants us to be investors, but all we concentrated on is being consumers. Buying, buying, buying. And that is a connection to unhealthy emotions. I'm trying to help you, and I want to use some of those illustrations because I want you to see it. To see how the secular and the sacred compartments can be detrimental to our progress. Let me get number 6. Doing for God instead of being with God. Doing for God instead of being with God. One of the great things about COVID is that COVID pushed us out of the building for a little while. And now that we're out of the building, we're able to rethink and reimagine the things that were excess, things that were necessary, and things that are unnecessary. Because a lot of us got caught up in what we were doing for God, and we missed being with God. We got so used to the work we were doing, the assignment that we had. I can't tell you how many young ministers are enamored with preaching, enamored with sharing the gospel. And I think that you should do that. But here's one of the greatest challenges of preachers and preaching, is that you can dedicate your time to getting a word for the people that you never get a word for yourself. Because getting a word for the people does not come in just preparing for sermons. A real word comes when God develops you in the process, so that I'm not just chasing a sermon, I'm chasing God. That was the problem with the word of faith movement. I'm gonna hurt somebody's feelings, because now I'm getting ready to talk about some of your favorite evangelists you hear on TV. The word of faith movement basically said that the measure of your faith was going to dictate what you got out of God. So all I had to do was have enough faith, and I can make God heal me. God, heal me right now. I can say money cometh to me right now, and if I say it enough times, the money's going to come to me right now. This word of faith thing. And so people started getting caught up in saying that stuff, claiming resources, claiming healing. And the problem isn't that in and of itself. The problem is that I wanted the healing, but never wanted the healer. That I wanted the thing he had to offer, but I never wanted him. That I wanted the blessings of God, but never took time to get to know God. Now, if that happens to us on the street, to us, we say we getting played. Somebody playing us for a fool. But when we do it for God, we try to call it word of faith. God wants us to chase him. And here's the ironic thing. When we chase him, the stuff comes. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Emotionally healthy people don't just do for God. They want to be with God. and being with God is important. Remember the story I preached? I think I preached it 2 weeks ago. The story of Mephibosheth. The blessing for him was being with David at the table. He sat at the table, and being in the presence of the king was blessing enough. And just being in the king's presence opened up other blessings for him. He got his inheritance and everything else in between. He got the people to help him work the ground because he was crippled and couldn't work it for himself. He got those blessings, but the big thing was he had audience with the king, and we need to be with God instead of just trying to do things for God. Let me get through the spiritualizing away conflict. I'm hurting. Emotionally unhealthy people always want to use spiritual language to get past what they're feeling. Man, how you doing? They, like Nehemiah, they're sitting down and they're weeping on the inside. Man, I'm blessed and highly favored in the Lord. Doc, man, I'm too blessed to be stressed. Doc, man, you know what the Bible says. Weeping endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And people's problem, they don't just say that to other people who ask them how they do it. They say it to themselves. So whenever the pain comes, they spiritualize it by trying to quote a scripture or trying to quote some cliche that they heard somebody else say. But you can't spiritualize away conflict. That's why I'm always concerned. Some of those folk that always deep and, always running around. I got a rhema word, and people who know me know me. I was called to preach at 12 years old. I delivered my first public address at 16. I was preaching across this state 18, 19 because of my connection with Pastor Charles Mark. Had me all up and down. I've been preaching for 2 decades. And let me tell you something. I don't always have a biblical verse to quote for what I'm feeling. Sometimes I don't need to quote scripture. I just need to say I'm sad. I need to say I'm grieving. I'm hurting. I need to say I'm overwhelmed. I'm in a group of men, and we have conversations about things once a week. And one of the brothers helped me out because he said that numbness is actually an emotion. That you can train yourself not to feel, but you're actually engaging in numbness. And George Floyd, his death kind of helped me to move past my numbness, because as I was watching all that was going on in our communities and just the injustice playing out in real time on TV, I was getting to the point I was numb to it. I was seeing so much. I was desensitized. I was watched the trauma so much that I didn't feel it anymore. But the George Floyd thing brought the feelings back afresh for me. And I had to say to myself, man, I was engaging and I was numb. And once I vocalized that, it kind of helped me to process it differently. So that the numbness was the feeling I engaged in at the moment, because it helped me to avoid all the other emotions. Steve Barney, earlier on, Steve Barney had said that this is an emotion that Nehemiah probably felt. Steve said helplessness. And sometimes when you just feel helpless, you just get numb. Like I can't feel it. I know that feeling of I'm trying to be the best preacher I can be, and the best pastor I can be, and the best husband I can be. And then all these folk who are out in the community got all they want to say about the church. The church ain't doing nothing. The church ain't this. The church ain't that. And then as soon as they got problems, they come to me. And the times that I may not be able to help, there's frustration now from them. I know what it's like to have all of those things commanding and demanding your attention, and to feel like if I come through for my wife today, I'm letting down the church here. Or if I come through for the church there, I'm letting down the community. I know that feeling of helplessness. And I'm not by myself. You all know that too. Dealing with your kids, dealing with your jobs, and all the stuff that you deal with on a week to week, on a day to day basis, you understand that. And so we've got to be real about not spiritualizing away conflict. Always trying to use spiritual language. Man, miss me with that. Somebody say that. Patrick Lyons, right there in the comment section. That's my line. You was laughing at me about the Roosters. I'm going to say this. Miss me with that. We need some real believers who can articulate with clarity. This is what I feel. I'm not going to stay there, but I'm going to be real about it. Let me get out of here. I got a few more to give you. Covering over brokenness, weakness, and failure. We can't cover over it. I'm gonna talk about weakness in today's sermon. So you all want to come to the 12 o'clock service? I'm gonna unpack that a little more. But that's number 8. I see you, Vet. I see you. Patrick was slow. Thank you, Vet. Oh, here he come. Here go Patrick. Thanks, bro. Oh, here go India. Thank you, my sister. So that is number 8. Number 9, living without limits. Get this one. Some of us running around like we don't got any limits. I can do what I want, say what I want, go where I want, spend what I want. That somehow that my emotional level has a infinite balance. That I got as much emotional capital as Bill Gates has money, which is not true. Some of us have been living on fumes for a long time. It's because we've been trying to live without limits. Be everything for everybody. And that's not feasible. That's why marriages don't work. Because I can't remember the brother's name. He wrote Love Busters, but he talks about relationships having these accounts. And if you're gonna have an account, you need to be able to make not just withdrawals, but you got to make deposits. And in a good marriages make deposits and withdrawals, and you've got to deposit more than you take out. And what happens in toxic relationships is that we manage our relationships the way some of us manage our money. Some of us manage money in the red, and we've been living in the red, operating in the red, accounts in the red, and all that type of stuff. And that's not just a money conversation. That's a relationship conversation. Some of our marriages, some of our romantic relationships, some of our sibling relationships, some of our parental relationships have been operating in the red, and because we've been trying to live without limits. Yeah, Debbie, I see you. Daily deposits. I was gone, Debbie, for 6 weeks. Of course, you all know that I was not 6 weeks. I was gone for 6 days. I was in Erie, and so my wife said, soon as I got back, she said, "This is what you're gonna do to make up for that time." She was, of course, she was messing with me. We were laughing about it, but in marriage, in relationships, in business relationships, romantic, family, whatever they are, you got to make daily deposits. And maybe depending on relationship, it's not daily, but I'll say this: you got to deposit more in than you withdraw out. All right, let me get out of here. Number 10, judging other people's spiritual journey. Judging other people's spiritual journey. I wish I had more time. I'm already 6 minutes over. But I need to spend a whole 2 or 3 weeks talking about judging. Because there's the misinformation about judging, but then there is also the abuse of judging. There are some people who are so finicky and don't want anybody to tell them when they're wrong that they assume everything as somebody judging me. The Bible says don't judge. Hey, they always say that. Well, they're not really judging. It's, man, you like the emperor without his clothes right now. You acting a whole fool, and I'm trying to help you out. And so we can't always assume that constructive criticism is people hating on us or people judging us. But there is a conversation around people judging. And sometimes people judge as a defense mechanism. I don't want to deal with myself, so I'm going to talk about your stuff. One of the reasons why the moral falls of spiritual leaders are so important for people is because people really want to rationalize. People want to rationalize their own spiritual journey. I remember when I first got called to ministry, Deacon Benjamin Mooney scared the living daylights out of me. He pulled me aside and he said, "Well, young man, you are now under the microscope, and we're going to be watching everything you do from this day forward." I've got Deacon Benjamin Mooney's words in my head all the way back then. And I tell people, and this is something that I'm very, very transparent about, that a lot of the falls that I have avoided have not always been about spiritual commitment. Many times it's been connected to a fear that I've worked so hard to do things a certain way. And one thing I know, therefore, a lot of people, as they look to me as a leader, for 10, 12, 20 years, I could do things a certain way, but one decision at one moment can undo 10 to 20 years of trying to be above board. That's not always easy to process. And it's something that I've wrestled with over life and over ministry. And I bring that up because people look at leaders and spiritual leaders, and they look at their falls in order to rationalize their own activity. But your spiritual journey is your spiritual journey. Every spiritual leader that you look at, from Jake's all the way down to your local preacher, all of them have things that they wrestle with. Because we're all human before we are any spiritual leader. We're all men, we're all women. We all struggle. We're all trying to figure this thing called life out in real time. All of us are doing it. And so what we cannot do is spend all of our time trying to judge somebody else and not pay attention to our own stuff. And we don't just do that with spiritual leaders. Some of us are so into what somebody else is doing. And we always talking about them. Oh, she was praying last week, but I see her cussing today. Well, maybe today she had a bad day. And her cussing today doesn't give you the liberty to say anything out of your mouth. You can't judge people and then use their faults or failures or shortcomings as an excuse to do your own dirt. All of us are trying to figure this thing out. And all of us have good days and bad days, good moments and weak moments. But thanks be to God, he's got grace and he's got mercy. He's got more grace and mercy than all of us. And one of the things that I take joy in myself is knowing that he's a God who forgives, even when people do not. And so you got to be careful judging other people's spiritual journey, because you can be looking at them that you miss what you need to do in and of yourself. All right, man, we unpacked a lot today, y'all. So Sunday school for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to be dealing with emotional health. And I'm going to be using Peter Scazzaro's book as a backdrop for these conversations, because I want you to get emotionally healthy. Today was really about unpacking some of the struggle stuff, right? And we're going to get into the proactive stuff on the days and the weeks to come. Bobby, I see you, man. I thought I saw Bobby Fletcher in the comment section. Oh, there you go. I love you too, my brother. Miss you, man. So good to have you on today. So good to have all of you. You all be blessed. 12 o'clock service is on. We are definitely going to get it in. I'm going to be talking about Paul and his thorn today, right? So the sermon I'm preaching today is going to be connected to what I talked about today in Sunday school, and we're going to see y'all in a little under 90 minutes. All right, we'll see you soon. Thank you all for being on. Blessings.